Hello, everyone, and welcome to the course. This is summer. It's actually quite summer. It's May, spring. But it's a summer course, accelerated course, 6 weeks course, summer of 2022. I am Daniel Toohey, Dan Toohey, your teacher for this online course. I hope everyone knows that this is an asynchronous course, more or less. That is, we will have no live meetings. The course will be conducted really through the Canvas site, through various things that you need to do. There is a practical course tour video that you should watch to see how the course is done. But let's just be clear that we will not be meeting through Zoom or any other live meeting, remote meeting technology. The course will be done asynchronously, so there's no scheduled meeting times. You just do the course as it appears on the Canvas site, due dates, readings, videos that I put up like this, and so on. So the practical course tour and just common sense looking at the Canvas site should clue you in on how the course will proceed. This video is really about what we'll actually be doing, my approach to the substance of the course, giving you an idea of what sort of moral philosophy course it is. So we can think of this course an introduction to moral philosophy, surely, and applied moral reasoning. You'll see that many of the things there's a number of assignments called ethical analyses, different things that you need to do. Really the emphasis in this course is on moral reasoning and doing analyses of different hypothetical moral situations, moral questions, and learning how to apply principles to particular situations. You can think of that as being the real approach of the course. My interest is in looking at how an introduction to moral theory, things like Kantian ethics, Utilitarian ethics, the various essays that we'll read on particular topics, abortion and charitable giving, how they may or may not inform us, in terms of help us to actually resolve moral questions. That's really what moral philosophy is for, I guess. So that's kind of my interest is in doing this class, is sort of thinking about how much moral philosophy actually helps us to figure things out in actual day-to-day life. So the two major theoretical sort of moral approaches, moral philosophies, very different moral philosophies that we'll be exploring in some depth, are Kantianism and Utilitarianism. There's not too much I need to say about that now, just some basic things. We'll start out reading Kant. Immanuel Kant, German philosopher of the late 18th century, very, very important philosopher in general in the history of Western philosophy, not just moral philosophy, but certainly his moral philosophy continues to be very relevant and influential to contemporary philosophers. So Kantian just means based on Kant, this actual human being whose name was Immanuel Kant, and that's where we get the word Kantian or Kantianism. It's a certain approach to thinking about morality, which we'll be going to some depths, but Kant is most famous in moral philosophy for his idea of these categorical imperatives. That's a term that you will definitely understand by taking this course. Categorical imperatives are basically moral rules, not oral rules. It's rules about eating. Moral rules that, let's say, our most basic ethical duties that he says that we must follow at all times. Basically, that everything that we do, our rule of action should be capable of being something everyone should follow, a moral law, a universal moral law, and also that we should treat all human beings as ends in themselves rather than as means to an end. But we'll be going into that in more detail. And that's a particular approach to a moral philosophy, a very useful one, as we'll see. Utilitarian ethics, basically John Stuart Mill's utilitarianism, a 19th century British philosopher. Basically that the basis of morality can be thought of in terms of how our actions affect human happiness, our own happiness, and the happiness of everyone else involved. That actions are to be judged morally, not like, say, Kant, in terms of whether or not they conform to certain rules, but actions should be judged wholly in terms of their results or consequences. That's why it's a form of consequentialism. And that the results that matter are the effects on human welfare or human happiness. So no action can be thought of as being intrinsically good or intrinsically bad. Actions are good or bad depending upon their consequences, and the consequences that matter are the ones on human happiness, whether they promote human happiness or detract from human happiness. So these are the two basic moral approaches to provide decision-making frameworks that you will learn and that you will be applying to specific hypothetical situations. The idea is that you'll start out without doing any reading, looking at some various fictional hypothetical scenarios in which you'll do an ethical treatment of it, just on the basis of what you think without doing any readings. And then we'll look at these moral theories, and then you'll take another look at it and sort of reevaluate things and see if Kant or Mill or utilitarianism actually affects the way that you do your moral evaluations. That'll take up quite a bit of the course. First 3 weeks of the course will basically be looking at these fictional ethical scenarios, doing ethical analyses, then looking at Kant and Mill, and then reevaluating that first week, and then taking a deeper look in weeks 2 and 3 of units 2 and 3, or weeks 2 and 3, a deeper look at Kant and Mill, and then taking some exams on that material. Then we will begin to look at two specific issues, two specific ethical or moral issues: abortion and charitable giving. And we'll read a couple of essays on each one of those, or both of those topics. And the idea there is to look at the way that philosophers treat specific ethical issues. Again, doing an ethical analysis beforehand, before we do the readings, and then doing another sort of reevaluation of the thing in the discussion board. So we'll be looking at two, I think, landmark essays in the abortion debate. One, Judith Jarvis Thompson's A Defense of Abortion, which is obviously a defense of abortion, moral defense of abortion, written in early 70s. And then Don Marquis' Why Abortion is Immoral. Obviously trying to take, something from both sides of the abortion debate. Looking at how these two professional academic philosophers actually treat the thing and the arguments they come up with, and doing that for abortion, and then doing that for charitable giving. Peter Singer's very famous essay, Famine, Affluence, and Morality, which is a very famous essay, again, from the early 70s, about what our duties or obligations are, in his opinion, in terms of what we need to do for people all around the world who we know to be suffering and dying, and if we have the capacity to give up some of our wealth or resources, whatever our duties and the extent of our duties, in order to help them. And then John Arthur's critique of Singer. I forget what it's called. It's in there. His criticism of Singer's argument in Found Affluence and Morality. This is a basic. This is all we'll be reading. I'll be reading excerpts from Kant's Groundwork for the Metaphysics of Morals. We'll be reading excerpts, but most of John Stuart Mill's Utilitarianism. Then we'll be reading these two essays on abortion, and then these two essays on charitable giving, and that will constitute the entirety of the reading for this course. And as you'll see, the assignments are really about moral reasoning, applied moral reasoning, and I think that is really what we're thinking about here. A lot of people regard morality as being so utterly arbitrary and subjective that reason, argumentation, evidence has no bearing on it. This course will not give a serious account of that. I mean, the presumption here is that whatever the basis of morality is, it may be subjective, it may be cultural, it may be theological, it may be utterly reasonable. It really depends on your moral theory, but all of them allow for moral reasoning. That is, moral reasoning is basically moral reasoning. It's thinking about morality and arguing about morality. But I would say that the most central thing in moral reasoning is the application of moral principles to specific situations, otherwise known as casuistry, in the history of moral thought, especially Catholic moral thought, but especially Jesuit moral thought. The idea that we start with sort of commonly accepted principles, and people argue in philosophy about what they should be. For instance, Kant's principle that we should always treat persons, other human beings, with respect. That is, let's just say, a general principle that we can agree upon. Casuistry is the art of actually applying it to specific situations, right? That is, even though we may agree on a specific principle, and maybe that principle is clearly true, let's say, to us, it's not so clear how to apply it in specific situations. The general principle of utilitarianism is that we should do things that produce the greatest happiness for the greatest number. Let's just say that's our basic principle. But how is that best applied in a specific situation? That's the difficulty, and that's really what the course is about, is practicing that. If we have some principles, some basic starting points in terms of what we believe to be true about morality, how do we apply it in specific situations? I mean, if we take something like the abortion issue, which we'll be going into in some depth, I think that we all have some regard for human life, and that we all have some regard for human freedom and liberty. And those are basic principles that most of us would, in some form or another, agree to. In the situation of abortion, how are those two things to be balanced? In terms of charitable giving, let's just say that we have some principle that we have a liberty to do what we like with our property. But we also have an obligation to do what we can to help others. How are those two things to be balanced? Casuistry is, really about how do we actually apply and balance the different moral principles that we all, in one form or another, not that we all agree upon them, that we all have. How are they to be applied in specific situations? In this course, you'll be doing a lot of practicing of that, right? A lot of hypothetical scenarios in which you'll be asked to apply either your own principles or the principles of these philosophers that we read to specific hypothetical situations. So that's pretty much the course in terms of the approach and what we're trying to get out of it. The goal is to, number one, to become more familiar with certain ethical decision-making frameworks from Kant and utilitarianism, and to become more familiar with the thought of these philosophers who have written essays on particular topics. But the overall goal of the course is to improve our ethical reasoning, to become more thoughtful. I don't expect to revolutionize your moral point of view. That's not really what the course is about. But to gain more practice in being more careful and thoughtful and precise in the way that we argue for, support, analyze moral situations. So that's more or less general idea, of course.